City Council.
Normally, in years past, the data, of course, was received at a much later date and avoided the election cycle immediately following a census, giving the council's committee much more time to review all of the data and make the decisions. This year, because of the technological increases, or improvements, I should say, that was received much quicker than we've ever seen it. We actually received our data here in our GIS area for the census tract and block information. We received that on May the 6th. We had just received notice from the state that those communities with districts were to follow the Home Rule Cities Act and have it ready for the August primary. That's not much time between May the 6th on a Friday to May the 10th on a Tuesday for a filing deadline for an election cycle. However, it is not doable. And that was our attempt to assist the committee with a proposal based on the census tract information to shift population within the districts simply to balance that population numbers. It wasn't to look at geographic areas or anything else. That's really what we did to try to assist the committee with making any kind of decision as to whether to proceed or not. And then Mr. Steeren has provided the assistance related to the other items.
Okay, and I guess just for a recap, so once we get the census data, then you go back and you research the precincts to make sure they're all of equal size, and they can't exceed 3,000 voters per precinct. So then you develop these now 32 precincts, and you try to maintain the existing precincts as much as possible so people aren't changed, obviously.
The precinct boundaries have to be observable boundaries. It's a little difficult to do that without roads that go straight through and connect to other items. And we had attempted, since that election law came into being, we have attempted to always create our precinct boundaries on as much along a major roadway as possible. We also then avoid those split precinct districts that conflict with county commission boundaries or state representative boundaries, whatever they might draw for the federal, state, and county boundaries. At the time we were preparing this proposal, the county commission committee was also preparing theirs, and they finalized their boundary lines, I believe it was May 22nd. And so we had to do a kind of a quick redraw to avoid a split precinct. That's also something that election law doesn't allow. So yes, we do try to keep those precincts in balance. We try to maintain that, and by law we are not allowed to exceed 2,999 voters in a precinct. So when we shift lines, we sometimes exceed those numbers, which caused the redrawing of several.
Okay, and if City Council chooses not to act, then everyone would vote in their previous precincts? These new precincts would not go into effect?
That's correct. If council chose not to act on any reapportionment this evening, we would continue to operate, or conduct rather, the 2011 election cycle based on the existing districts, the existing precincts.
Okay. So following your process, you got, obviously can't violate the U.S. Senate guidelines or House Representative districts if we happen to split our city, which is not occurring, correct?
And we will not receive that data until November.
Next year, okay. So if that changes, then that could change how it may be. But then the only process you have now would be the county commission, which you check and verify that we didn't split a precinct for that. So beyond that, then you look at the census data and split the city up into these equal precincts, no more than 3,000 people, so you have the 32 precincts. And then from there, you try to, every district gets 8 of them, and then you try to make it the best you can to group 8 together. Which, again, you're appointed, you're not elected, so it's not, there's no political process involved with this. You've done this on your own. Nobody from city council or the mayor's indicated or had any say-so on how to come up with a map. It's totally of your own charge in doing on that. I guess what strikes me, it's really kind of the process is it's evolved and developed on its own, pretty much. There's really no political gerrymandering, yes, I've heard the term thrown out, with this at all. The only thing where I'd see it would become political is if this council or future council says, well, you know what, I want to change this district and I'm going to swap you for that district or that precinct, and then we're going to trade this precinct for that precinct. And that becomes political then, because now we're politically saying, well, no, I'll take precinct 6 and I'll give you 14, and you know, that you know, to me, you do the best job you can to split into 4 equal, distinct quadrants that are contiguous, and beyond that, not toss it into being a political football. If council did not act on this map, what other map could they possibly act on other than it becoming political? To me, that future council could come back and then it's either going to accept this map or it's going to accept a political football of saying, no, I want to trade this precinct for that precinct, and everyone's going to trade one precinct around the four council districts in order to make the same 8 precincts per council member for a district representative. That's my initial thought looking at this, is like, there's really not much that can be done, if anything, because it's a process that develops and given back to us. And I'm also struck by the fact that, you know, in our own ordinance, which Mr. Stern, you can allude to, saying that once we receive the census figures, and not later than 30 days after state law allows for precinct boundary changes, city council by resolution shall reapportion the 4 districts of the city from which the city council members are elected. And I guess the indication now is that through another community on the west side of the state, that then now we can overlook our own ordinance on reapportioning our districts. Is that true?
Sort of, if I may explain further. One of the driving force, certainly everything starts off with the census. Beyond that, then we have to look to the law, and there's many laws that come into play, but the Home Rule Cities Act, which has been in place for decades and decades, is really what controls what we say in our ordinance and how this process takes place. And it's important, again, to remember that law has been in place for decades and decades, because it goes back to when the census data took much longer to produce and wasn't just provided in electronic, easy-to-use format. We also used to have primary elections much earlier in the year than we do now. So the law was drafted at a time where we didn't have this issue with census data coming out in mid-election cycle. Nonetheless, the law clearly says that I'm reading from the Home Rule Cities Act, that the local legislative body, prior to the next general municipal election occurring not earlier than 4 months following the date of the official release of the census figures of each United States decennial census, shall apportion the wards of the city in accord with this section. And the state elections official had construed that to say that we needed to get the reapportionment done prior to the primary election, which is a practical matter, given, you know, starting there and then having to look back as to how much lead time do we need to get the ballots printed, the absentee ballots printed, and so on, moves that date back. It pretty much became, you would have to approve this tonight in order for that to happen. It's doable, but this really is the last chance to do it. Didn't seem like it gave us a whole lot of time to look at this. We did also talk to the county elections official, who acknowledged that this puts us in a predicament. It's problematic, it's inconvenient, but he urged us to move ahead and get it done if we could get it done. Meanwhile, we've done some further research. I made some phone calls. I spoke to some different folks. I spoke to the folks out in Grand Rapids. Clerk Leslie has been in touch with election people out in Kent County, where it's a bigger problem. So we're unique here in Oakland County. We're the only ones, with possibly the exception of Pontiac, who are facing this issue right now, because everybody else has either gotten rid of their primaries or they're not holding primaries this year. Kent County seems to have Grand Rapids and 4 or 5 other communities that are going through this. They've made the decision out there that they just cannot get this done and aren't going to get this done in time. They did get some feedback, something in writing from the state elections official that basically said, if that's how they're going to do it, if that's how they're going to construe their local ordinance and charter provisions, the state would not stand in their way. We, in pursuing this with the state elections official, did get a similar email response back from the state election official saying basically the same thing. If the city council is satisfied that under its charter and ordinances that it does not want to or need to approve a reapportionment before the primary election, then the state's not going to create a problem, or is not going to have a problem with that. It's not exactly the strong statement of support we would look for or hope for from the state elections official, but they're struggling with, again, an old law, Home Rule Cities Act that's been in place since 1909, and trying to apply it to our situation in 2011 that, as Jane explained, we've never had this issue before. We've never gotten the census data released right in the middle of an election cycle. So that's why I outlined three options as I see them for the city council. I mean, it is physically possible and arguably in strict compliance with the state law and city ordinance to approve a reapportionment plan tonight, recognizing the inconveniences and potential confusion it creates, as well as the admittedly hasty fashion that this had to be put together. Another option would be to approve something tonight, but to not put it into effect, in other words, delay implementation of it until, say, January 1. Or the third option is basically what the committee recommended at our meeting, which is to not to recommend a reapportionment plan to you at this time and allow for further study, recognizing that would have the effect of not having a reapportionment plan in place for the upcoming primary and general election, because that would have to be done, I mean, really right away. We're talking about just a couple of days leeway we have here in order for Clerk Leslie to be able to meet her publishing requirements and such. Tomorrow.
Okay.
Not even a couple of days.
Very good.
Less than 24 hours.
Okay, council deliberation. This, Mr. Klump.
Thank you. Well, you know, things have changed, right? We have the information now. It seems to me it would be prudent for us to act on the information that we have. I read the charter as about equal representation. It's set up because they wanted, in the beginning in 1984, they wanted to have equal representation. They didn't want too many people in one district and not enough in another. I understand the time constraint, but I think to wait would be merely putting off what is expected and asked of us through the city charter. And Ms. Puskas, I understand your concerns. I hear that statement. I put, time and effort and thinking about the districts, but let me remind you that this was not set up to protect the politician or the person running for office. It was set up to protect the population. I think that the intent was not about individuals. It was truly about the voting rights and equal representation of our citizens. So I'm in support of that for sure, and I think that we should continue and get this going. I think it's prudent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alamachi.
I would go with the committee's recommendation for a couple of reasons. One, if we're really interested in protecting the voting rights, I want to make sure there's no confusion. Even in a normal course, I have experience where residents come up to the polling place and are trying to figure out, is that the place they have to, and sometimes they're asked to go to different precinct. I don't want to add to that confusion right now. If there is nothing that's going to affect us, and Mrs. Sterren, you gave 3 recommendations, and we can choose this, I would rather be patient, make sure we're doing it right, and implement it, sometime effective January 1, 2012. Again, I have no interest in trading any precincts, but my district looks good now and looks good afterwards too, so I'm okay either way. But still, I would wait until January 1, 2012.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Weber.
Yeah, I certainly appreciate the comments of my colleagues, and I appreciate Councilman Rosen for his report on, we did meet Councilman Pixley and Councilman Rosen and myself May 27th, and we did talk about this, and, in a lot of respects, we are a little bit between a rock and a hard place, technology catching up to a 1909 state law. And I've already talked with our state representative, Tom McMillan, about that, about some potential changes to the Home Rule City Act so that we don't have the same predicament in 2021. Having said that, I had a little bit of, a minority viewpoint on the committee in that, I don't really see where we're going to get a whole lot more data between now and August or September where we can't make this decision tonight. The census data is going to remain the same. We know that we need to shift the districts regarding population because the District 3 and 4 have more population now than Districts 1 and 2. Quite frankly, I think there would have to be a lot of voter education that would have to be done. But from a disenfranchised voter perspective, you could argue that people would be put into districts after the election and not having an opportunity to vote for who their district representative would be. Now, obviously, we can't go back and change the election of 2009, but for the voters in District 3 and District 2, they have an opportunity this year to elect who's going to represent them for the next 4 years. The population is not going to change in terms of the census data. The plan, I think, Clerk Leslie, to me, is above reproach in terms of being able to put together a plan. I'm not sure if we sat around, given the laws that govern, how we have to put these districts together by the major streets and all that kind of stuff, if we would have a lot more maps to look at, quite frankly, to make a decision other than the one that we have tonight. So I too am comfortable moving forward, and I don't think in terms of the printing deadline, I know that the printing has been held up for this discussion, and I think everything could proceed as planned. So.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Brennan.
Thank you, President Hooper. I agree with a lot of the comments made here tonight in favor of taking immediate action, which I'd like to repeat. And first of all, there is no evidence here of gerrymandering. This was objectively done by our clerk, and I think she did an outstanding job. Secondly, these aren't congressional districts which cover large distances or dense populations. We're just dealing here with the city, and I don't think the geographical distance is really that significant. The purpose of reapportionment is to equalize the council district populations based on the latest census. And when I read Mr. Steran's memo, I believe that the pros clearly outweigh the cons. So I would make the motion at this time that we approve and put into immediate effect the council district reapportionment plan submitted by Clerk Jane Leslie.
Motion by Brenner, is there support? Support by Klomp. Okay, discussion on the motion, Mr. Rosen.
Thank you. Couple things. It's been, I apologize for that. Clearly, in talking with Ms. Leslie, the city started out many years ago with, and you can probably guess it. We had 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 districts back 40 or 50 years ago, back when there was very little population. And every time precinct, and that's one of the other confusions. There's precincts and there's districts. We've had 4 districts since '84. We had no districts before that. So the precinct boundaries were all about voting or registered voters in an area, not about just population. Starting in '84, we have a population that determines the district size. It doesn't say it in the charter, but it seems as though the city has always assumed it's a quadrant-like structure. That is, northwest, northeast, southwest, southeast. With splitting precincts over the years in order to balance precinct, to avoid having too many voters in a precinct, we've changed those boundaries to something sort of resembling quadrants, but not really anymore. I think there's a couple things to keep in mind. Gerrymandering is about politics and getting elected. What we're doing is apolitical. That is, since we don't have parties, it doesn't make any difference what the districts are, except for the fact that I said it again, I'm sorry. I get confused between precincts and districts. It doesn't matter. The precinct boundaries are intended to be easily recognized. The population boundaries are intended, the district boundaries are intended also to be equally recognized, but be based on precincts. They have to link together. The difficulty here is we've strayed from the quadrant approach that we had, obviously, some 25 years ago when the city was new. So now we're trying to come up with a plan that satisfies the legal requirements without fully satisfying a couple of the charter requirements, and that is contiguous. There's a theory in congressional reapportionment. It's called the rubber band. That is, you get the most compact district that can have the least border surrounding it, that's the idea. That famous district in Boston or Massachusetts or wherever it was that resembled a salamander is where the gerrymander came from. We're not that bad, but we are straying from compact. None of the districts is particularly compact. And at one time, as Ms. Leslie mentioned, we started from the corner of Avon and Livernois as kind of the 4 corners of the city, if you will. That was the geographic center. So what we're doing now is coming up with a different plan that really doesn't have any relationship to 2 of the important charter criteria, and that is compactness and geographical recognizability. I guess that's the way I want to say it. And I don't know if this is the plan that makes the best sense. It clearly satisfies the requirements of the law, but whether it is the most equitable to voters, we are not required under anything to gerrymander, if you will, according to politics, because we're not Republican Democrat, and that's what that entire process is all about. It isn't about being fair. It's about securing congressional districts. It's well established in their business. It is unestablished in ours. So, unlike some of my colleagues who think there is no harm in going ahead, actually there could be. It could turn out that there is a much better plan that makes a lot more sense for a lot more people that we don't know about. We haven't seen it. And because precinct boundaries have to also line up with county commissioner and all the other political subdivisions above it, which are gerrymandered, again because of politics, we're kind of the clean one here, and I have a problem with going ahead with this. I don't know, I can't propose anything better because I don't have the data. At least I don't have it well enough to be able to come up with my own plan. But I can't support moving ahead because I think it's going to either disenfranchise or penalize folks for what area they're in. I mean, the reality is Oakland University and the immediate area takes up a big chunk of the area, the geography, in the, quote, northeast quadrant. Just like a lot of the open space in the northeast quadrant takes up a lot of open space. So I don't particularly, while I would like to convince my colleagues, I think we're far better off taking a slower, more deliberate approach. If we come up with the same plan after looking at it, a couple different alternatives, fine. But I think we need to keep the two parts of this, one spoken, or one part of the home city rule, that is the contiguous, and the other unspoken about quadrants of the city. We've had a couple people already talk about that tonight, and I think that's important. I truly do. To the district concept in Rochester Hills, the easiest thing is if we didn't have districts, this wouldn't be a problem. We'd just go ahead and divvy up the precincts and go home, because it wouldn't matter. It does matter. It matters more to the people than it does the politicians. I mean, I suppose, I'm not sure how I would react if, and Robbie said it well, my district's the same now and in the future. Okay, so for 2 years, we're fine. The only time it comes into play is if someone's a district elected and I'm sorry, I said it again. If they are district elected and their district changes such that they're no longer in the district, that is a problem because they can't continue to serve. It doesn't affect the at-larges, which is why they're the ones that have to do it. So, again, I don't think we should, and I think it is in fact ill-advised. I would ask City Attorney, can somebody, if we make the decision to go ahead, can we be subject to legal challenge by voters, much as congressional district challenges are?
Yes, as part of the reapportionment process, a court challenge could be made to any reapportionment plan approved by the City Council within 30 days by any resident.
Oh, okay, by any resident, either whether they change or don't change?
Correct.
Okay. Okey-doke, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Yalamachi.
Follow-up, 2 questions. One is, what's the negative side of not doing it tonight, Mr. Staren?
The negative side of not doing it tonight, I can give you, I guess, a couple of things to consider, and one is was mentioned, looking at the state law and the city ordinance, and arguably being out of compliance with what the black letter law says. And the other, I guess, consideration that I would give to you is one that was mentioned. You have the primary overriding reason that we do reapportionment and districting is to try to equalize the population balances. You now have official U.S. Census data hot off the press that is telling us that we do need to do some redistricting. Not a major overhaul like some communities have to do, but that our districts are somewhat out of balance. So in terms of pros and cons, those would be the cons of not moving forward. Strict adherence with the law and recognition that the census data shows that our districts are out of balance.
And also on the other side, could you do it and not implement it effective to a later date of the election? Is that allowed? If you were to pass tonight?
Well, that's an argument. The Home Rule Cities Act talks about reapportioning the districts or wards. Doesn't expressly use the words implementation. You could argue that it's implied when they say reapportion, they mean approve and implement. Doesn't necessarily say that, but we have to be careful about that, because then certainly the law is intended to have a fair election process, to have a one person, one vote type of situation, not to set the stage for there to be games where, yeah, we're going to approve a reapportionment plan tonight, but we're going to put the implementation of it so far out in the future that it's meaningless. And I'm not suggesting that anybody's talking about that tonight, but just as an example, you could see the kind of gamesmanship that could come with that kind of interpretation.
Okay. So if this were to pass tonight, will the residents be notified where what precincts their new precinct numbers will be, and will they be sent new cards?
Whenever there's a change of precinct and precinct location, the residents, the voters, are all individually sent a new voter identification card, giving them that information, but it is sent with a letter that gives them also then a map of the precinct location if they are being changed to a new location, so that they will have that information. But everybody is notified.
Okay. Other than us and the candidates who are running for office, I'm not sure how many residents will pay attention to this. I'm just not sure, by patiently waiting for the election to be done, what's the loss we have. I guess that's the part I'm trying to understand.
Is that it? You're done?
Yeah.
Okay. I guess I'll wrap up here my comments. One, as I analyzed this to begin with, the precincts aren't going to change. They are what they are. So nothing's going to change precinct-wise today, tomorrow, or within the next 10 years. So the only thing that's going to change is this, what I call political football, that some new council in the future, if it's not decided tonight, it's going to come and say, well, I want to horse trade this precinct for that precinct. And everyone's going to trade one precinct is the only thing that could possibly change on this whole map. So I don't want it to become political. It's done by an appointed individual, our city clerk, that's developed the plans, got no political leanings or process involved with it. Why make it political? I don't want to get put on that route at all. The other point I thought Mr. Weber made was very important, was that it's going to affect really District 2 and District 3, which I represent, and frankly, I'm the one that has the biggest change in this. There's 3,000 voters that changed within my district. So you add the 3,000 voters that change in my district and the 1,800 voters that change in District 2, there's 4,800 voters, potential voters, that are not going to be able to participate. They're not going to be able to vote for the wrong candidate or not be able to vote for the candidate that's going to represent them for the next 4 years, which I think is wholly important, that this map is going to be approved, short of a gamemanship going on, or we're going to actually have the proper voters voting in the proper districts for their representative they want to represent them for the next 4 years. Every voter is going to be identified, or personally notified of the change for that, for this election. And as far as I'm sure we'd love to have the precincts or the districts, and the same thing Mr. Rosen doing. I'm sure we'll have the districts to be in equal 4 quadrants of the city. But unfortunately, our city population doesn't live in equal 4 quadrants of the city, and it's not developed that way. So that lends itself to has to be some manipulation of the city in order to make contiguous 4 areas as close to as possible within these 4 quadrants. And frankly, I think Clerk Leslie did the best job that could possibly be done to create the 4 distinct districts the way they are. There really isn't anything to discuss. From what I see, short of again the future council saying trading this precinct for that precinct, and everybody trading one around the corner. So with that, and I want to disenfranchise the voters that will be affected by this. I'd rather have their opportunity to vote for the district representative they want. And frankly, I'm the most affected in this because I'm in District 3, and I'm having the biggest change in this versus anyone else out there. And with that, I just don't see. I think the appropriate decision, the correct and appropriate and right decision, is to make the change now and not kick the can down the road.
Mr. Hooper?
With that, we have a motion by Brennan, supported by Clapp.
I have to correct a couple of factual errors that you made.
We'll have a very short rebuttal, and then we'll take a vote. So,
Fine.
Mr. Rosen.
You said that precincts don't change. Many precincts are changing. There's about 10 or 12 of them that are changing. In addition, districts are changing. So precincts do change. That's a big deal. That is a big, and this may be the right plan, but I think that in itself says you can't just say that districts aren't changing and that precincts aren't changing. They are. There's 2 new precincts, and by my count, something like 8 or 10 of them change.
No, there's 3 new precincts, not 2. But irregardless, it's going to change. It will change, no question about it. Population's changed in 10 years, the precinct's going to change, and the districts change along with that.
There's only 2, 30 and 31.
30, 31, 32? Okay. Do you have anything else, Mr. Rosen? Okay, Mr. Almonte.
32.
Mr. Hooper, just a clarity, you said District 3 will gain, but this is showing net decrease of 966 voters being moved. So there's a net decrease, but not an increase. Am I looking at the wrong one?
No, you're looking at the correct one. What it is right now, there's more voters in District 3 today.
Okay.
If this motion by Brennan, supported by Clapp, goes through, there'll be less voters in District 3 after the change.
So
Population has grown. District 3 is the largest now of the 4 districts.
Oh.
And that's why the shift needs to occur to change the precincts and change the size of the districts so that they're more equally balanced now.
I mean, I'm not involved in this. I just looked at it over the weekend and today. I have no interest in getting involved, so obviously I'm thinking Ms. Leslie is the only one doing this.
Correct?
I'm thinking, so that should not be an issue for our discussion, and I don't think that's an issue for our discussion. My only point is, by us doing it tonight, will it cause confusion to the voters? And obviously there's candidates running, will it cause the confusion? If it doesn't harm us in any way, can we just keep it to, for January 1, 2012, so that it'll be effective 2013? That's all it is for me. I'm not interested in anything else. That's the only point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion by Brennan, supported by Clapp. Yes vote is in support of Mr. Brennan's motion. We'll take a roll call vote.
President Hooper.
Yes.
Mr. Brennan.
Yes.
Mr. Clapp.
Yes.
Mr. Rosen?
No.
Mr. Weber?
Yes.
Mr. Yalamachi?
No.
Yeah, motion passes 4-2.